Congressman Brad Wenstrup, welcome again to the Bill Cunningham Show. And Congressman, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Bill. How are you?
How would you tell an average person trying to figure out what's going on in Washington? How would you describe what's happened the past 7 to 10 days in Washington, D.C.? You've got a front row seat. You're on the Intelligence Committee. Of course, Republicans don't have much power in the House. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But how would you describe what's happened the past week or 10 days?
Well, going to power in the House, Nancy Pelosi has done everything she can and has for the last several years to strip the minority party from virtually any kind of rights that they may have. She's changed rules in the House, et cetera. I don't even know where to begin with that kind of a question, because what we saw in the last week, I think you're referring to the situation where they're trying to pass these bills. In the House of Representatives, the bill for infrastructure, the $1.2 trillion, is inextricably linked to the reconciliation bill, which is a socialist spending bill of $3.5 million that will change the face of America in many, many ways, but also put taxes on Americans that is going to be very harmful to business. But that's just the background. So now we get into it amongst the Democrat Party. They're fighting like cats and dogs, and that's probably putting it politely.
For a long time, Senator Bernie Sanders, who's an admitted socialist, he's not even a Democrat, which is the second cousin of communism, says he wants to fundamentally transform America. If somehow the senator from West Virginia and the senator from Arizona somehow flip, which I still predict at some point they will do something, describe what happens if we spend $3.5 trillion extra to the welfare state, which is really about $5.5 trillion, and we also have confiscatory taxes with 88,000 new IRS agents prowling around your life. Explain 2 or 3 years from now what happens if the Democrats have their way.
Well, let's go with the IRS for a second. They want to add all these agents, and they also want to have access to anybody's bank account that has over $600 in it, and to see every type of transaction that you may have. This is clearly the government trying to meddle, to try and be able to go after whoever they want for whatever they want. And we've seen in the last several years how they will make things up and just continue to go with it. Unfortunately, the media continues to allow them to tell false stories, and it takes a lot to get the truth out. But then you're going to see inflation. You're going to see people controlled. Actually, we're cutting down opportunity. In Ways and Means Committee, when they were passing this reconciliation bill, putting it through that committee, I finally just said to them, you act like you're trying to help so many people and it's compassionate, and some of these things are. But the first thing you have to recognize is you're not paying for it. Somebody else is. And besides that, when you help one but you harm hundreds of others, that's not compassionate, and that's not ideal. So all these things sound good, and some Americans may fall for it, but the reality is people are going to see it. They're already starting to see it. Bill, I had a guy, he's a lineman for an electric company in a rural area. He's got one child, and he gets this child credit check in the mail, and he says, I don't want that. What I want is for the prices to be down so I can afford to feed my family and maybe be able to afford a steak for our family once in a while, because the inflation is kicking in. You see your gas prices going up, and it'll get worse. The other thing is we had no inversions, no companies leaving the United States to become a foreign company since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because we became more competitive, and so companies stayed and new ones came. This will do just the opposite. It'll drive people out. And even if they reduce the amount of money they're spending in that reconciliation bill, what they will get through are those taxes. And those taxes are what's going to hurt us at a time when people need it least. People need that additional money in their paycheck, and they have to understand between those taxes that'll be passed on to them and also the inflation that's going to hit them, people are going to be taking home less at the end of the day.
Look at it this way, for those listening all over the country and especially locally, think about this. that right now we have insipid inflation that's come into the system. Add on top of that, let's say the Democrats have $3.5 trillion of new spending relative to so-called human infrastructure, which is a gross increase of the welfare state, and $1.2 trillion in real infrastructure on top of the $3 to $4 trillion already spent in the CARES Act. You're talking close to $8 or $9 trillion chasing fewer goods. I'm watching one of the morning shows about all the supply chain is completely broken. Mm-hmm. There's something like 200 ships off the California coast. There's something like 80 ships in New Orleans. There's 78 to 80 ships off the East Coast. And so you have more and more dollars chasing fewer and fewer products. That is the classic definition of inflation, because it's got to go up markedly. And inflation is largely an unspoken tax on middle class and poor Americans who pay that. And so if you have free community college and you have increased earned tax income tax credits, if you have these electrical stations, 1,000 all over the country, when we don't have a power grid to support it, all this means is that individuals will be encouraged not to work, but encouraged to stay home, which means there'll be more employers without employees. There'll be more ships that are going to be unloaded. According to one expert I had on about a week ago, we need 100,000 more truckers every year between the next 10 years, which we don't have. And so when you have trillions of dollars chasing fewer products, that is the recipe absolutely for inflation. Now, Congressman Wenstrup, you're an expert on many things. I'm looking at the Drudge Report. It says China flies warplanes over Taiwan. Taipei preps for battle. USA very concerned. Our friends call our foreign policy imbecilic, which is what the Brits have called Joe Biden's policy in Afghanistan is imbecilic. Then our enemies fear not. The red Chinese know that with the Trumpster in the White House, they had to factor in the equation, what will America do? When the communist red Chinese look at what Biden did in Afghanistan, what do they have to fear when there's no American soldiers presently in Taiwan? And as a consequence, they might think now's the moment to attack. And how bad would that be?
Well, one of the rumors I hear is that they would want to attack Taiwan after the Olympics. Understand that that's an important thing for them, right? So it would be after they have their Olympics, if they have them. I don't even know that we should go, to be honest with you. But this administration, I'm sure, will, because they just view it all much differently. Look what they did in Hong Kong. They got their sights set on Taiwan. They've already taken over much of the South China Sea. Even the communist nation of Vietnam is with us against China because they see that China is trying to take over the entire region. We just struck a deal with the UK and with the Australians. The administration probably should have spoken to the French about it, because the French had the deal for these submarines with Australia and this change. But this is a good alliance. This is kind of like our NATO, if you will, on that side of the world, and we need that. And we need our European nations to be in with this as well, not just the UK. But Australia needs that. But Australia's had some backbone. Just look at the origins of COVID. Australia came out and said, we think this came from the lab in China. What did China do? They tried to hurt them economically, and they struck out. But Australia is standing by it because they fear for their own national security on that side of the world. Well, this world is a lot smaller today, and the United States needs to be helping and defend our friends around the world, or next it's us. And we are in a bad situation. You mentioned the supply chain. If you'd have told me when I was serving in Iraq as a surgeon that my protective equipment and my pharmaceuticals relied on China, I'm asking, how did we ever get here? And that is something I'm working diligently on, especially DOD is working diligently on to figure out, who we rely on. So we don't want companies leaving our country. We want to have our own supply chain, and we have to work with our allies, and we have to push back against China. But this administration has not done it. They were actually extremely weak on this commission on origins of COVID. Anyone with a brain that's in the science world knows differently than what the Biden administration intelligence community came out with after that. We got a problem. We got a problem, and it's an American weakness right now.
Everywhere I look, Brad Wenstrup, U.S. Representative, everywhere I look on the southern border, allegedly, in one of the morning talk shows, said 80,000 more Haitians are making their way from southern Mexico, from South America into the United States. There's about 10 million Haitians behind them. And by the way, if I lived in Haiti, if I was a human being in Haiti, the first thing I'd want to do is somehow get to Mexico and then walk into the United States of America. We've had Mayorkas is talking about 80, 90% are released inside the country somewhere. It's a horrible place to live. Haiti, most of the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Mexico. I want to get to the United States of America, and I look on the southern border, complete disaster. When I look at our foreign policy, in which our friends call us imbecilic and our enemies say it's time to act, we have nothing but challenges there. I look at the American dollar being trashed all over the world. The yuan, according to the Communist Red Chinese, within 5 years will be the world reserve currency. I look at the incentives of Washington not to create jobs, not to cause American businesses to grow, but to be scared to death as to the next bill that Bernie Sanders and the squad are going to bring forward, which is going to confiscate more and more of their wealth. Everywhere I look, I see monstrous problems. You're a positive guy. Can you give me something positive to talk about? Well, what is something good happening in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think one of the good things is we are seeing an overwhelming amount of people that want to run as Republicans, and we are determined to take back the House. We have got to take back the House. Americans across the country are looking at this as our first and one of the only lines of defense we have from our country completely faltering. I think more and more people are getting it. Independents are certainly getting it. And, you know, we are working hard to play a lot of defense. I guess one of the positive things is the Democrats are fighting, and they're fighting. And all week long we're waiting for them to bring the infrastructure bill, but they don't have the votes. And that's because too much of their body is so far radically left. And that's why they're fighting amongst themselves. And I hope they just keep it up, and especially until next year when we are determined to take back the House.
When you prowl the hallways of the Congress and the Capitol, you must have conversations with some Democrats without breaching any secrecy or any confidence, without mentioning a name. Do the ones that you interact with on the other side of the aisle understand how injurious these bills are to the American way of life, that the welfare state doesn't have to be on steroids, that we already have a 25% increase in food stamps happening this month in October. We already have that going on. It is easy not to work and to make it. We have all kinds of moratoriums happening on evictions in some cities and states that aren't following the national example. But when you talk to those across the aisle, do they give you hope that they know what Nancy Pelosi is seeking to do to this country?
Very few, I'm afraid. I mean, because even what they call moderates are pretty liberal. They really have run out their blue dogs, and there's just a few of them left, and they're not treated very well by Nancy Pelosi, to be honest with you. And she just as soon see them gone. I don't know. I think that they have a different mindset in so many ways across the board, Bill. The problem is they think that big government is the way to go.
Right.
And they do not mind debt. They think that that's all just okay. And so that's a problem. And actually, I wouldn't say that, because when it's Republicans proposing any kind of spending, they're all over the debt, right?
Right. Oh,
and Republicans are guilty, too, of where we are debt-wise. No doubt about it. But they're only against it when it's a Republican idea. So they were saying that the debt was going to go way up with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but actually because so many people went back to work and so much opportunity was there and people were making more money as a result, there was greater revenue to the Treasury. And so, you know, you can increase what you bring in by increasing your volume. How do you increase your volume and income to the government? Is having more people working and paying taxes. And when you start taxing them more, that usually leads to fewer jobs and then less revenue, even though on paper it looks like it's going to be more, because you're increasing taxes. You know, it's very short-lived.
And lastly, you know the statistics. The top 1% who make about $400,000 a year or more. The top 1% pay about 40% of the tax bill, even though they make 28% of the income. And so it is a canard to say that if you can come up with some method for these billionaires in order not to pay taxes, that'd be great. But the average person making between $200,000 and $700,000 feel as if they already pay enough in taxes, but the media enough doesn't have the income distribution chart. The bottom 50% of wage earners pay about 2% of the taxes, and the top 50% pay 98%, and the top 1% pay 40%, yet earning 28% of the income. How come that doesn't work? Those numbers seem to me to be maybe skewed to the wrong direction, but the media never points out that the top 1% in general pay the great bulk of the taxes in this country.
Well, because facts used to be stubborn things. I think it was John Adams who said facts are stubborn things. They're not stubborn things when it comes to this brand of politics, unfortunately. And so they just ignore those things, and then they go out with their talking points and say tax the rich. And, you know, I think it was Bill Maher, very liberal, right, who actually stuck it to somebody in an interview. He said, you keep saying that, but you got to look at it. The rich are paying the taxes. It's not like they're not paying any taxes. They do pay the taxes. Why do you keep saying that? Why do you keep lying to the American people? This is Bill Maher.
Well, because it's the truth. It is the truth.
He's decided to be truthful, I guess. And whereas too many can just go out, say whatever they want, and those in the press just sit there and nod and go, yeah, 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 as opposed to challenging them, saying, well, that isn't really true. No. And so that's what we're left with in this country. And I don't know if you ever saw the Truman Show from years ago, where, you know, it's one man, everything around him is fake, but he doesn't know it. Right. And that's his life. I'm afraid that's the way it is for a lot of Americans, because they get fed a story and they don't know to disagree. And, you know, when you really point out facts to some people today, they go, oh, you're making that up.
Making it up. Yeah.
They don't know who to trust either, so that's a problem.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, you're a great American. Keep fighting the good fight. Hopefully this thing will never happen. By Halloween, which about 4 weeks from now, supposedly, there's going to be all these things that happen. But I pray to God that Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema remain firm, and that AOC continues to push a left-wing agenda rejected by the so-called moderates, and we have some civility and some common sense in Washington. Once again, Brad Wenstrup, thank you for coming on the Bill Cunningham Show. My friend will do it again. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, guys.